Okay, so thank you so much, Jen, for joining us this afternoon for the PLP guest lecture. It is lovely to see your smiling face at the end of the line. Do you want to wave to everyone and say hello?
Hi, everyone.
So for those of you who haven't met Jen before, Jen is a lecturer, a tutor, and unit coordinator, prac supervisor at Notre Dame University. But Jen actually has quite a life outside of uni too. And that's why we're talking to her today, because we're looking at AITSL standard number 6, engaging in professional learning. So welcome so much, Jen, and thank you for your time today in chatting with us.
Thanks, everyone. So I thought I might start and give you a little bit of my background. Do you think that's a good place to start?
I think it is a fantastic place to start, Jen, because your story is incredibly interesting.
Oh, thanks. So just very briefly, the first bit is that I've been teaching a long time. So I started teaching in the late 1980s. So that was when you were actually still allowed to hit children, just on a point of note. So in terms of, a lot of you know that I'm very involved with technology in education. So I've seen a huge amount of change in education over that period of time. And one of the things is that I love change. I love to see it. I love to see the way that it's been translated into schools. And a lot of the work that I've done throughout my career means that I get to embrace my passions of being able to work with schools and individuals to look at how they look at their practice, how they improve their practice, and essentially what they can do to really improve some student outcomes. So I've had a number of things that have helped me along the way. So I thought I'll give you a little bit about my education. So where I've come from and how I ended up in this place. So my original undergrad, that was a primary degree, and it was when we did a real major. So we did proper science for me. And so that meant that I was then able to teach secondary science as well as my primary degree. Then I went back, I did my first postgrad, and that was looking at technology in education when computers were just beginning. And we had, I think, the Commodore 64s, Louise.
Oh, wow.
Yes, we had those. And so they were what we started to do some planning and programming and so on. And it was when life was very hard with technology in education. And I actually wasn't that much in love with it at all. It was something I saw as almost an imposition. And I remember one of the essays that I wrote was about the impact, and I applied it in quite a negative manner about the impact of technology on education. I saw it as quite a negative for things, but that has obviously changed. I went back and did a grad cert in early childhood, and then I finished a master's in educational leadership, and now I need to pull my finger out and do some further research and so on. So that was kind of my education and my field of where I started. And then what I did was, shall we go through just the summary of the main roles that I've had in my life?
Well, I was thinking, Jen, of all of the amazing things you've done. You've worked for SEWA, you have worked in schools, you know, your ICT, your science, probably why we get along so well and have our good old chats all the time.
Yes.
You've got roles at uni. It's up to you, whatever you would like to share with everybody, because, you know, it's so interesting even where you've gone from in this journey.
Yes, so one of the key things that I decided when I was only a few years out of uni was that within 5 years, my goal that I set for myself was within 5 years, I wanted to be doing more than just classroom teaching. I don't mean there's anything wrong with classroom teaching. I wanted to be doing more than that. So I ended up at just 4 years out of uni applying to be the science consultant for Catholic Ed schools. And surprise, surprise, I actually got it. I don't know how, still don't know how with that one. And so it meant that I was then helping guide professional learning for primary schools across the state when I'd only been out of university for 4 years. And it really helped me to refine the way that I work with adults. I had to do a huge amount of research and a lot of professional learning to understand how to work with adults, because it's very different working with adults and doing professional learning to what it is working with children. So then I went back into schools, and so I've ended up teaching most year levels in primary schools for periods of time, long and short. I've worked in most year levels in secondary with my other jobs that I've had. I then went back into CEWA. I was an ICT consultant for a number of years. I was then headhunted by an IT company and worked in their professional learning capacity within that. And then because most of my teaching career, apart from my first couple of years, most of my teaching career, I've had more than one job. So that's why I have all of this amazing experiences that a lot of people just haven't had. I've been a sessional lecturer and tutor at Notre Dame now for 20 years. I started to work that out and went, oh, that's a very long time.
You know that some of our students that we're talking to today are only just freshly 20 years old, right, Jen?
Yes, I know. And
Okay.
so I've been, at uni that long. And so I've worked in School of Ed. I worked with helping lecturers in the quality management section, as well as in the study support centre, working with some of the students who are coming in alternative pathways into university. So I've kind of worked in a number of different areas, but always in the education kind of field. What I do now is that I have my tutoring and lecturing that we do, plus then I have schools, childcare centres and universities around Australia and Asia who engage me to work with them at leadership level all the way down to grassroots level, looking at how they can create transformational change, particularly in their use of technology in the classroom, but often in their wider pedagogical applications and things like their contemporary approaches to learning design in terms of their furniture, as well as their setups of their classrooms and so on. As part of that, I'm also a professional development provider for Apple, one of only a few in all of Australia. And then just as an aside, I've also owned a bead and craft business for a few years in the middle of all of that while I was still tutoring and teaching and doing lots of things. So it's been quite diverse, but most of it from after my 4th year out of university has all been involved with adult education and building professional learning capacities with other teachers and with students who are on their pathway to being teachers. So it's been a different set of experiences to most teachers and the way that they've had their careers. Mine's gone in a slightly different pathway.
Look, and I think that's why I thought it would be really great to chat to you today about AITSL standard number 6 with regards to engaging in professional learning, because you have seen it from the provider point of view, you get to participate in it, you work with it on a day-to-day basis in everything that you actually do. And I know that I learn a lot every time I talk to you. So that you actually provide my professional learning every day too. So, thank you for that, Jen. Now,
shucks.
If we go to talking about AITSL standard number 6, and I think for our pre-service teachers, we are still learning it. And actually for a lot of teachers that are out there, we're still learning what do each of the AITSL standards mean, and being able to break them down, identify what it is that we can use for our own AITSL standard professional portfolio at the end of the day. Would you like to talk to us a little bit about AITSL standard number 6 and what does it mean to actually engage in professional learning?
So if we look at the 4 main aspects that they talk about in Standard 6, we've got, first of all, being able to identify and plan their professional learning. So that's for you as a teacher or a prospective teacher to think about, well, actually, what do I need to know? And I'll come back to that because that's a really pivotal thing, the what do I need to know? Then to actually engage in some professional learning and improve with the point to improve your practice, not just to put yourself into a seat, sit and passively listen, but to actually go through that process of them putting it into practice in your classroom. The third part is that we must engage with our colleagues, again, to improve our practice. And the final part is where we put the students at the centre and we want to apply our professional learning. So what does that mean in real terms? For me, it means, number 1, you have to seek where you can do constant improvement. So you don't ever sit there and go, yeah, I'm really good at that now, and just stop. It has to be that constant seeking for improvement. You want to be able to think about how you can read, talk, and engage in rich dialogue. So that might be with colleagues like you and I were just saying. We often have these really deep conversations about things with something that you might have been reading as part of your research, with something I've been doing with a school. You engage with your colleagues and at this much richer level than just at a superficial level. in terms of what it means in practice, it means that you've got to take on new things. There's a lot of people that I started teaching with that I'm working with now in my capacity as a consultant, and they just turn around to me and they're like, but you're the same age as me and we started uni together. Why are you so in touch with all of this? For me, it's that taking on board new things. And then the next part is you've got to be willing to learn from and with others. So if you want to look at those aspects of professional learning, it's not about just sitting and receiving information. You've got to be able to work with people, and you've got to be able to think, okay, how can I learn from them? You might take one little bit and you go, oh my God, that is the best idea ever. Everything else they're doing is not relevant for my needs, but that's a really cool idea. And then one of the other things that I really have to help people to understand that they're doing, because oftentimes we don't realize we are, I see a lot of teachers who fall into this, what I call their nice, comfortable coasting trap, where they're just having a great time, everything's rolling, but they haven't embraced any new technology. They haven't kept up to date with any of their readings. Then they're still using behaviour management techniques that were popular 15 years ago, but we've done a whole lot of research. We know different ways of doing things now, and they've not moved along with all of that. And the final part is that you'll see for the AITSL standard number 6, we have to keep our students, our children at the very centre. Everything we do should be to improve their outcomes, not just their learning outcomes, but their outcome of being a responsible, respected member of our world. So we keep the children at the centre. So when we think about it, we've got to work out how do we actually do this in a way that works. And one of them is being able to understand the different components of professional learning. So you don't want to be just being talked at by somebody. You have to be an active part of that learning. So professional learning is about interacting with the content and the practice to make it better for your children. It's not just about going off to a professional learning event, because that's what I find in my work is that people say, oh, if only you could run an after school session. I'm like, yeah, I can run an after school session, but isn't it better if I'm in the classroom with you and we look at your context and how you can engage with different ways of doing things? That to me is about outcome number 6. It's how you engage with the content to make it better for your students.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Jen, for breaking that down. And I think that the students can really start to see how AITSL standard number 6 quite easily starts to fit into all of our other AITSL standards. You know, we often talk about each of the standards in isolation, but as you've been talking, you can see about how it relates back to the children being at the centre, which is AITSL standard number 1. It affects obviously your planning, your practice, and even your engagement with the community there. So thank you so much for breaking that down for us. Now, I don't know how often you get asked this question, and I've asked you this question a few times, and I think you know what I'm about to ask you.
Yeah.
But you are obviously a professional development provider.
Yes.
Okay. It wouldn't be very often that you go to a professional learning conference per se, or a day out, and you might go, oh yeah, that's, you know, I've heard a few things of that before. But how do you yourself stay engaged in professional learning when it's actually your job to be the provider?
It's a really interesting thing, especially with technology often being at the core, and, you know, particularly iPads. So you have to be on the cutting edge of things. So the best way, and I know it's a weird one, I curate very carefully my social media. And I actually put that as my very first thing. So I follow some amazing people on Twitter. I have a fabulous Facebook feed. Yes, it has all of my relaxation things, my craft things, and so on as well. But it actually has a whole lot of amazing Apple Distinguished Educators. It has a whole lot of amazing groups that have developed out of people wanting help with technology and wanting help with understanding how to teach science effectively, how to teach reading effectively. I follow a whole lot of teachers on Instagram so I can see the way that they're doing things. And then I've got a whole lot of different news articles and so on that I have subscribed to, so they come to me. So I curate my social media so it lands in my feed, on my Twitter, on my Facebook, on my Instagram, and in my email. So I make sure that I'm careful about who I choose to follow. And so every time I pick up my iPad for my relaxation, instead of reading a trashy magazine, I sit there and I'm curating my feed, wandering through my Facebook and going, oh, wow, saving those links and so on. And I'm getting people who are doing it in a classroom that day. I'm not getting somebody who's talking about what they could do. I'm actually seeing it in real life. Now, to make sure that I then have all of my theory, I buy and download a huge amount of Kindle books. So I have Kindle as my proper little Kindle device, and then I have the Kindle app on all my electronic devices, and I have constantly got at least 3 to 5 books that I'm reading at any point in time, depending on what my mood is at that point. The latest one that I'm reading is a couple of great ones on blended learning at the moment, because that's really key for us with what we're trying to do. I listen to a whole lot of podcasts. I love TED Talks, and I have set up feeds that send me all the TED Talks for the topics that I like. So whenever I am either on public transport or when I have to drive for more than 10 minutes, I pop my headphones in, I stick my podcast on, and I have a listen to some different things. It gives me a real diversity. That's where I get a lot of my science information. And then, of course, I've got this amazing set of professionals, you being one of them as well, that I chat with regularly. And especially when I'm in the middle of trying to develop something new or I'm having difficulties, I call on my other professionals. Now, one of the key things that I do, and I know you've laughed at me when I do this quite regularly, because you do it as well, is...
I know. We're not...
Yeah, you know what I'm going to say this time too, don't you?
Yeah.
Is that I say yes to a lot of things. Even when I'm not really sure that I know enough about it, I'll say, absolutely, yep, we can do that. And then I spend the next week or 2 or 3 doing a huge amount of research. So that becomes my deep knowledge about a particular topic. And then in contrast to all of that, what I do is I actually then make sure I schedule some unplugged time. So I do craft classes once a fortnight. It gives my brain a different place to gather for a while. And then what I find when I come back after craft class, I've got this renewed energy. My brain has been working away behind the scenes trying to do things. So I have all these different ways. It's nothing that is magical. It's just a constancy. And that's what I find is, instead of just using my Netflix as a relaxation, I've got my social media. So then I actually get it coming to me, a lot of things. So yeah, it's not one thing, but that whole saying yes, I do that a lot.
Yes. We do that, don't we, Jen? Which is probably I've said yes to you a number of times, and you've said yes to me, hence that we're self-propagating this problem we have.
Yes.
Yes. Look, I really liked, so throughout all of that there, you actually gave our students some really good advice, and what you said at the end there really resonated with me. Scheduling unplugged time. All of our students are actually going through the BRIGHT program, regardless of when they're in early childhood, primary or secondary at the moment, with the PLP program. And part of that is looking after yourself. So I'm really glad you did mention that. But I was thinking along that lines of advice, specific advice for when our students are on PRAC. What can they do to continue to engage in professional learning when they're obviously going to be flat out? And both of us obviously supervise our supervise Notre Dame students. So what advice would you have for them going on to PRAC?
I think remembering that you are on PRAC to learn. So part of the learning is being able to apply some things. So start off first of all by watching and listening, and then asking questions. When you ask questions first, you often don't have enough information. But if you go through a process of watching somebody do the interaction, listen to what they're saying to the students or what they're saying to a colleague, then ask the questions. Now, I spend a lot of time when I am doing any work in a new field with my notes on my phone or my notes on my iPad, and any topic or person or researcher or something that somebody mentions, I write those keywords down and then I go and research them. Because what happens is that they will all have a whole lot of information. And so you might not be able to go along to professional learning. You might have missed it. But for example, one very topical thing at the moment is Talk for Writing. There's quite a number of our department schools that are using Talk for Writing. There is a huge amount of stuff that is online that is free for teachers to do with Talk for Writing. Plus there's some books that you can buy. And then I found some other ones I can download. One of the Facebook groups I'm in talks a lot about how to teach children effectively how to read in the early years. And there's been a big debate about synthetic phonics versus a number of other programs. Synthetic phonics was something that I hadn't heard of a huge amount. So I went and researched it. So now I'm able to engage in discussions with some of the schools that I'm working with who are starting to talk about whether they use this program or not and how they can use their iPads in conjunction with it. I think to invest some time in your professional literature, you have access through the Notre Dame Library. Write down those keywords, find some readings and journal articles that match. Put those into your OneNote. I think when you're on prac, and even if some of you I know are starting to do some volunteer work in schools, think, can you observe more than one teacher and more than one subject area? Because often the way that you would teach science to lower secondary students is quite different to the way that you would teach HAS to primary school students and vice versa. So if you can observe more than one teacher and more than one subject, particularly I find the way that males and females interact, that can be a really different way of looking at things from your professional learning. And then do what I do, curate your own social media. I know lots of young teachers, they set up their own separate Instagram, separate Facebooks and so on. So that way all of your professional stuff comes through one. Now, go with our philosophy. Say yes. Yes, I will take on that HAS lesson, even though I've never taught HAS or haven't had a whole lot of experience in it. Or yes, of course I can do that PE lesson, even though I haven't done that yet. So say yes, worry about the how later on. You can ask questions. Whereas if you turn around and say, oh, I'm not really comfortable doing that, your teacher will go, Whereas if you go, oh yeah, that'd be great. Don't know how to do it, but let's give it a go. Your teacher will be more willing to give you some help with it. And then one of the other things is that often in schools, you have professional learning sessions or staff meetings, or there might be collaborative professional learning sessions. There are going to be some things that are not always essential for you to attend. See if you can see, number one, if you're allowed to, but also then volunteer and say, I would love to find out more about that, because you find that the year 4 and 5 teachers are sitting and having a meeting about how they're going to implement TELP for writing. Or that the year 7 and 8, the teachers of the year 7s and 8s are all having a talk about the new behaviour management program that they're setting up in the school. So ask and volunteer to attend any of those. So some of the great examples that I've seen, one of the students that I was observing and working with last year, what they realised was that it was the talk for writing, that they found there was some online sessions that they could actually sign up and do. And she ended up actually having some other teachers from the school come and observe her lessons, because she had really mastered the way that you would use the talk for writing tools in her series of lessons. And she was so chuffed, so nervous, but so excited that other people were coming to watch the way that she had actually put it into practice. And all she'd done is exactly the same professional learning. She'd volunteered to go along, but then she'd actually found some online classes that she could do as well. Then we had some others that what had happened is that the school, the lower secondary, they were looking at the behaviour management policy in the school because they realised it wasn't working for the new batches of kids that were coming through. And what this prospective teacher had done is she had sat and realised that the students she was working with, some of them were having great difficulties understanding how to behave. So she'd done a whole lot of research, and she was actually asked to be part of this policy development group. And again, she was so proud of herself, and she was like, I don't know what I can add. And I said, well, you've obviously been, noted that you have done some professional readings and so on, and they want to have your knowledge as a young, outgoing teacher. And then the other thing for your supervisor, putting my supervisor hat on, add lots of your professional readings into your OneNotes, because as you start to hear what's going on in your school, find things and add them in. You might not have time to read them all at that time, but add it in, and then you've got, oh, that's right, they're using that model, and that's the matching learning for it. So they're the things that I think are really important. Volunteer for things. It's amazing what will happen when you just go, yeah, I'll do that, and do a bit of research for it.
It's quite interesting, because I'm thinking along the lines of what can the students also have at the end of the day to to sign off that they've in fact been doing this reading. So it might be a reflection on a particular reading. It might be noting down those readings in there. It might even be tying it into the practice that you're doing in the classroom. So you might have in fact a reflection on your lesson, and then that sort of obviously ties into AITSL Standards 3 or maybe 4, and then if you're talking about classroom management too. And then you've also got this aspect where it's tying in those professional readings, so you're tying in AITSL Standard number 6 as well. Is there anything else that I've missed there, Jen? Because my go-to is note-taking and reflection. You can see how my brain works.
Yep.
Do you have any flowcharts work really well to see how those reflections tie in together? We love a good flowchart.
Yes. Always think, how is someone actually going to see you go from what you've read and how you put it into practice? You want to be able to link those two in some way. And looking at how you could use, because now you've got to use a OneNote for a lot of things, how you can actually annotate over the top of your lesson plan. I find a lot of pre-service teachers, they get very caught up in their lesson plan being pretty, whereas right over the top of it and say, right, I tried this. Or go back and say, okay, if I'm doing this spelling lesson again, I'm going to try this instead. Or when I go back and redo this with the other Year 8 class, I want to try this example. So going back and not being afraid to annotate over the top of things based on your readings. Instead of beating yourself up, go, okay, this is part of a learning process, and that's part of my AITSL Standard 6 is to keep up with my professional learning. It's constant. Our change is constant. We want to constantly be working on how to make it better. Making ourselves feel worse about it doesn't help. We can just go, right, how are we going to make it better?
I did laugh there where you said we like to have, we get so caught up on having our lesson plans look pretty. And for those of the students that have had you or I before, they're probably already well aware that we like our presentations to look pretty or our websites to look pretty. But everything doesn't always go to plan for you and I, Jen. And I think that that's something that we should remind our students, that it does turn into a bit of a mess sometimes, but we're not afraid to try. We're not afraid to say yes. We're not afraid to keep changing and say, well, you know what, if it didn't work this time, let's try again and let's do something different. It's not to say that it may not work next time. So going into the teaching profession, and obviously all of our students will have jobs in the next few years.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. They have jobs and beautiful classes to work with. What advice do you have for our pre-service teachers when they actually have their own classroom? How should they stay engaged in their own professional learning?
I think one of the first things to keep always at the front of your mind is that change in education is constant. Never before have we had so much change, and particularly in the last 6 months of our lives, we've never had this much change, have we? Like, it's been insane. And what it's done, so one of the schools that I'm working with at the moment, they've got over half of their staff are 55 plus. So they're not on the the right side of their career. They're on the downward slope. And then all of the students move to online learning. They have done the most amazing growth in a very rapid pace in time. And so what it's done, so many of them have said, oh my goodness, why didn't I do this years ago? It's not that scary. So I think that idea that change is constant, so embrace it. Ignoring it, ignoring all the things that are going on around you and going, but this is the way it works for me. It's not always the way it's going to be. So we need to accept that things are going to change. Now, one of the other things that I see all the time in schools is that well-meaning leadership teams, that there's usually a good reason for it. They want to change things, and sometimes you need to be the person that puts the children first. So AITSL Standards 6 is all about professional learning to improve student outcomes. So we must put the children first. So we have to make sure that policies for change shouldn't be just for change's sake. We've got to make sure that the change is going to be better for the students. It might not be better for us as teachers in the short term in particular. Often it makes more work or it's a bit more stressful, but it's got to be the best for the children. And that's why a lot of things that have happened with child safe framework and lots of protective behaviours and so on, they've been difficult for teachers. They put children first. And a lot of our things with technology, we have to put the children first. So don't be afraid to speak up and ask what is the impact on the students regarding some of these. And that then leads me into my next point, which is you have to make sure that you are willing to do some research and to engage in some good discussions. It doesn't mean that you have to go off and attend week-long conferences on something. Sometimes reading 2 or 3 good articles combined with listening to a good TED Talk is going to give you more than enough information to be able to engage in a rich discussion, putting the children first when your leadership team says, oh, we're going to throw out this spelling program and we're going to implement this new program that we've found. And you're like, but is it fully founded in research? We have to make sure we have professional learning at the core of it. And then the other thing is, your final bit, you've got an obligation as a teacher that you have to record a certain number of hours. I won't say how many because they have changed it over the last couple of years, and there's talk that they will continue to increase it. It used to be a very nominal amount of, what was it when I started teaching, when I would first join teacher registration, it was like 15 hours over every couple of years. Now I think it's at 30 hours per year or 100 hours over 3 years or something. You've got to know what you can record in your teacher registration guidelines, because that all adds up. And those rich discussions, that research that you've done, as well as the professional learning that you attend and the online courses you engage with, all of those are part of how you demonstrate your ability to engage with AITSL standard number 6. That is what you can start to record from now on as well. So a lot of the work that you're doing as part of your PLP program now, that can all be recorded as part of your AITSL standard number 6, because you're engaging with all of your professional learning. So that's my thing with teachers. You've got to know how to record all of that great learning that you do, and not just see it as where you go off and be fed something from an expert.
And I think when we're talking about teaching and what's at the core of our profession, it's about education. So I know that a lot of our students are hoping that when they finish their degree, that's it on learning. But remember, you're wanting your students to continue learning throughout their entire life. You know, lifelong learning is one of those catchphrases that is used a lot in education. And we also need to model that too. As I can see, you might not be aware, Jen's shaking it, she's nodding her head and saying, yes, Louise, that's absolutely right. Look, so Jen, thank you so much for joining us today and having a chat. And we always have a good chat, and it's always lovely to chat with you. So thank you so much.
Thanks heaps. I hope that it has been informative and given you an idea of how to unpack your standard number 6 a little bit more, and what you can actually do as a pre-service teacher moving into your teaching career as well.
Thank you.